let's say starting from 2021, the average salary in per month basis, I think it's easier to understand, is there about $4,800. So when it go into 2022, we see a huge surge on that. So that actually went up by a good hefty close to 10%. So 2022, the result shows at around 5,400, which is the biggest spike that we have. And that shows a very candidate-driven market where I think we can see a handful of, a lot of tech giants were really going out for the talents, right? And that kind of explains the skewed number.
The steep V-shaped recovery.
The steep V-shaped recovery, that's right. That. And in 2025 this year, slightly optimistic, we're looking at probably there about 5,008, which come up to be $70,000 per annum. We're seeing lower job demands. With that context, we're seeing some roles that's been moved out of Singapore as well. So we're looking at the remainder of people having allocation and having a job currently. And if I look at that context itself, it could be maybe 2% doing 3%'s job or 1% doing 2%'s job. Wow. So if you look at that premise, right, this slight increment is actually quite evident.
Hey Coconuts, I'm sure you're familiar with our friends World First. World First is an all-in-one business account that fuels your business growth worldwide. And yes, they have been fueling TFC. I've used it myself. So World First have allowed me to open up a multi-currency account at zero cost and no fees and no minimum balance needed. So they have a new product which I will share with you more later in the podcast. Meanwhile, if you want to check them out, link is in the description below. And yeah, welcome back to the show. Let's roll.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm your host, Dawn, Budget Babe.
And I am Alex Low. You can find me on social medias. I am Alex Low, Growth Mindset Coach.
Today, we are talking about the salary climate and
job
the
market.
jobs markets in the current context, which is getting some people a little anxious. But I think it's a very evergreen topic because we're always curious and want to know where we stand in terms of the salary benchmarks and how we can obviously improve that. And our guests for today have just released a very insightful salary guide that some of you can go and check out. So joining us on this episode are two guests, one of whom you might have seen before, but we'll let them introduce themselves. Ken, can you start because you're the new face on this?
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Ken. I head up the recruitment solution business in Morgan McKinley in Singapore. So very happy to be here. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks, Alex, for the invitation.
Hi everyone, I'm Puay Lim and I'm a partner at Talentkraft, which is a HR consulting, training and strategy consulting firm. Formerly also from the recruitment and talent acquisition space, but really happy to be here.
Thank you.
And Ken, I'm going to just go out and ask. Your guide indicates, or the guide that you guys have released indicates that the average salary in Singapore right now stands at about $70,000 annually.
That is right.
What are some trends that you see have shifted in terms of this number versus the past, and where do you see that going?
Sure. Firstly, I think it's important to understand how the context of this survey was actually drafted out by close to 2,800 employees in the market.
PMETs,
PMEC,
right?
PMAPs. And then we also interviewed there about 350 employers. So a range of industries. So that's how we find the findings. So 70,000 is the medium salary that we come out of this year. I think more importantly is for us to look at the previous years, right? And to have a comparison of that. And if I were to look at it, maybe let's say starting from 2021, the average salary in per month basis, I think it's easier to understand, is there about $4,800
in 2021.
And then 2022, it was I believe 2021 was the COVID era. Post-COVID, just post-COVID. So when it go into 2022, we see a huge surge on that. So that actually went up by a good hefty close to 10%. So 2022, the result shows at around 5,400, which is the biggest spike that we have for the past 10 years. And that shows a very candidate-driven market where I think we can see a handful of, a lot of tech giants were really going out for the talents, right? And that kind of explains the skewed number.
The steep V-shaped recovery.
The steep V-shaped recovery, that's right.
That.
And then in 2023, 2024, I would say that is when kind of the market slowed down a lot. I think it's back to the employer's market, and within that context, the salary was quite flat. So probably 2023 and 24, we're there about at 5.4, 5.5-ish. So not much changes. And in 2025 this year, Slightly optimistic, we're looking at probably there about 5,008, which come up to be $70,000 per annum. A reason for that this year is a very interesting take as well. We're seeing lower job demands. So with that context, we're seeing some roles that's been moved out of Singapore as well. So we're looking at the remainder of people having allocation and having a job currently. And if I look at that context itself, it could be maybe 2% doing 3%'s job or 1% doing 2%'s job.
Wow.
So if you look at that premise, right, this slight increment is actually quite evident. I think it's necessary as well to reward the current employees in the market.
Kind of growth of job scope. Like.
It is growth of job scope.
And where are you seeing the largest attrition? So you mentioned a lot of roles are leaving Singapore. Do you see any trends in terms of the types of roles that are being left and retained in Singapore versus those that have been taken away?
I wouldn't assimilate that with industry per se, because to each its own is really quite tough to give a gauge of it. But if I look at role specific, I think anything that is more middle to back office function, for example, let's say like finance and accounting, anything that's very BAU, operational, cyclical, those roles have a great influx to Malaysia. Last year and this year, in fact, to the extreme that we are potentially looking to set up a business over there as well.
Wow. Okay.
So we're seeing a lot of demand in that
offshoring.
area. Offshoring, yeah. Used to be outsourcing, but because of how the climate is right now, I think a lot of companies are looking to do offshoring.
And in your salary guide, even though the median was pegged at about $70,000, there are roles such as database professionals where it goes a lot higher, 120 to 180K. What factors do you think enable them to be able to command and be paid such a high salary? And what can everyone else who are not in these roles do to get themselves closer to these kind of benchmarks?
This is the question that I get asked every day. So firstly, let's look at, I think instead of looking at database, just look at, data as a whole. I think it's there's a lot of hype within the word data right now, right? We're looking at data scientists, data analytics, data analysts, and essentially these are the people that use number to spot a trend for the company. I think in the current context, every firm is trying to be data-led. There need to be a measurable essence to, let's say, profitability, but even opportunity as well. There needs to be a way of stats around it as well. So essentially, this data pool of analysts has become a very, very essential, critical part of the setup itself. More importantly, I think what we're looking at is really the mindset, right? I think as a data analyst, constant candidates that we speak with, they like problem solving. They are very good with math. They love stats as well. They normally come from like degree in like computer science, financial engineering, so on and so forth. The gap though, however, from what I see in this current market right now, because these people are so technically driven, right? By financial modeling and all, sometimes stakeholder management is a bit of an issue, right? They are not perhaps the most go-to person if, let's say, I were to explain what does this trend means to, let's say, my CEO or my managing director. So I think that back to your second question, if it's as a professional, let's say, who is in a certain field and they have the business essence of that, if they can then pick up some certification to enable them to, do some data crunching and to be equipped with things like SQL, Python, even like data visualization tool like Power BI or Tableau, these are essential certifications or certain software and hardware that we're looking at so that they can actually be the merit between, the numbers as well as laying that out for the business.
Right. And Puay Lim, you have a long experience of working with people on all these. What would you say in terms of everyone who is actively seeking new roles in the next 6 months? I think the data is pinning that at about 55%. What would be the best advice you can give them? Because everyone's complaining that it's hard. What can they do?
To keep a job or to find a better job?
Find a new and hopefully better job.
I think the climate, thanks very much to Cam for giving that kind of overview and setting the scene a bit, right? Because essentially what you're seeing broad trends of like digital transformation, which is why data is so centric towards things. But that's it's not a one-way street, right? I think what Ken was talking about is, hey, everyone who's in the world of business or everyone is kind of working for some kind of organization. There's a way to adjust and adapt to kind of newer ways of working that's data-driven, and data is like the bedrock of digitally run businesses, right? So it's kind of like up your digital fluency or literacy, learn to work within this world. And then equally, it's also the other direction where it's like, hey, all you techies, learn to also build up your soft skills, and because the world isn't just purely run by numbers. People and relationships are still a big part of it. So I think that's kind of like the broad landscape. And then you overlay on top of it, there is actually quite a bit of uncertainty that's going on in the market.
A bit or a lot?
Well, yeah, when are we releasing this? It depends on which day you're releasing it, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of volatility, and I think generally when this kind of market environment is going on, what you see from most employers is people take a bit of a wait and see approach. So they're a bit more cautious, and Ken talked about doing more with less. That's been a theme that's been around. It's not new. It's been around for like 18, 24 months or so. Do more with less. People are trying to drive up efficiency, be a bit more careful about how they spend. So if you talk about job seeking today, right, it's tough. It's going to be tough, right? I mean, I've heard anecdotally about graduates or soon-to-be graduates actually holding off their graduation. They're trying to go into internships and all that to kind of delay a little bit, get entering the job market. If you talk about mid-career PMETs, right? And if you're looking for a better job, or you're just trying to consolidate your position in the business, I think the upskilling around the areas that Ken has already mentioned, that's definitely valuable, because you're showing that you're adapting towards what's now more relevant and more required in the job markets. So I mean, we haven't used the buzzword yet, right? AI. It's like, everyone needs to know some form of AI, right? Exactly what? Nobody has a super clear idea, but you need to have some kind of fluency with it. You need to have some ability to work in a data-driven way. Ken talked about things like the visualization tools and business intelligence tools and whatnot. All of those are almost becoming sort of like the hygiene. It's no longer like a plus. Then you talk about so scaling is one thing. Then another one is around your adaptability. So when you talk about doing more with less, and people who are double hatting or triple hatting, the ability to even do that, it's a skill, right? It's a mindset and it's a skill. So I think the willingness and ability to do that becomes a lot more important. And then I would also say there's something around business sense, because fundamentally, and maybe even more so right now, the consciousness over, the profitability of a business, right? Does it make sense or not, right? If what you're doing, you can't draw a line and you can't draw a relationship towards, am I contributing to the betterment of this organization or this business, right? Then how do you show demonstrably the value that you bring? And I think it's always those roles and those jobs where that's a little bit more vague or less clear, then you're kind of at risk, right? It's a lot harder to prove your value or your contribution. So I mean, you talk about advisory, it's a bit long-winded, right? But it really comes down to you got better skills, adaptability, ability to do more, and then contribute to the business. Yeah.
Right. And given the current market climate, everyone's worried about a recession. Every employer is trying to cut costs. But every employee is trying to increase and fight and negotiate for a higher salary. Is it the right time for employees to ask their bosses for a raise now? And if so, or if they are going to do that, what would be your best advice to them to approach this conversation so that they're not shown the door instead?
The time is, some people say the time is never right to ask for salary negotiation. But to me, the time is always right to do that proactively. I think the last thing we want in such a climate is, surprises, right? Out of nowhere, you go and say that, hey, I actually been doing this and I feel I deserve an X value of it. I would probably advise them to start looking at the parameter of even the appraiser setup itself, making sure that has been proactively mentioned, not just in terms of X value of what, but looking at scope and breadth of what they have value added, and to unlock that achievement that is being recognized by their peers and their bosses as well. To have that session to talk about that, I think is quite important in today's context, because you need to justify a certain pay rises, right? And I think it's also very important, like always encourage people to do a bit of research as well, to not just do that. The truth is, the HR in organization, if they have been there long enough, probably they may get out of touch of what's happening outside of the company. So as a value employee, it is also important, and you are playing your role as well, to constantly stay engaged with what the competitors are paying, to have that range and give back and give that as an insights to the HR. Just like our salary survey as well, right? We use that. I think it's all about sharing and denominating what is then that fair gauge of it. I feel that with that proactive communication and doing the right sort of research, I don't really think it's the timing. As long as you're demonstrating the value you're adding on a day-to-day basis, I believe one very big talk about subject right now is also retention of good employees. So definitely I can see a merit in that.
I mean, this is related to the previous question on, you talked about business people needing to learn data and data people learning to do business, right? So if you are a data person and you sort of like show that you have that additional USP, right, then that gives you the ability to command a bit more.
Correct.
Right. But back to that question also, based on candidates that you have spoken to, is it easier for a business person to acquire that data skill set, or is it easier for a data person to acquire a business skill set?
Any take on that? It's a tricky one.
Puay Lim looks like he has a take on it.
I really think it's based on the individual. It's very hard to detect what that is or not. But what I can share in that, so my background has always been a lot in financial services, right? And looking at financial services, like big financial institutions, what they used to do last time is they have a data team, right? That go around as like, let's say, a change team, project manager team. They go around, managing different projects as a BAU function. What I've seen right now is a lot of these SMEs are being hired directly from the business. So for example, if I'm in the compliance team, I'm in the governance team, I will actually hire a data analyst to sit in my team. So the exposure to frontline businesses is there. So I would say that it depends on who wants it more, because on the same hand, the business person can use this opportunity to pick up new skill, whereas the data person who is perhaps newer in the team, given that the recent hype of that, recent demand on that, if it really takes an effort to understand the business means of it, I think it really go both ways.
I think an important clarification is that I think you cannot expect complete fungibility, because behind your question, Alex, it seems to sound like you're suggesting that, hey, is it easier for me to convert the business guys into data guys, or is it easier for me to convert the data guys? But I think the reality is that there will, at the end of all of this, there will still be data guys and there will still be business guys. But it is important that they speak common languages and they get exposure to each other's worlds. They will still be stronger at certain things than others. I think that's without doubt. So
I think it's more a
need to
question
bring
of, the viewers or listeners, if they're a data person or they're a business person, and hearing case studies or stats from you to validate whether or not it is going to be easy or easier for them to make that upskill as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. So that was the context of the question.
I would argue is, I don't know what Ken feels, but I would argue that when it comes to these skills, it's going to be in hygiene, right? So it's almost like, if you want to stay relevant, right, you don't have a choice. I think you do need to get yourself in, if you are coming from one side of the fence, you need to expose yourself to the other. I think it's a matter of time.
And I think it's not just about just data per se. I think that's again just a word that we use, right? I mean, you look at data itself, is all about trying to get some measurements of a certain trend. It could be a lot to do with, let's say company optimization, or it could be things like integration, M&A. There's definitely a change element within what the data component is coming through. So I would say for business people who probably is doing a BAU role, business as usual, I would probably do a bit of CCA, raise up a hand, get involved in projects, get involved in change. Because when you do that, right, just based on your day-to-day basis, right, you will be speaking with different sets of stakeholders outside what you do on a daily basis. And I think that is the essence of, ever-growing and continuous learning, per se.
I like that.
Lifelong learning, right?
Lifelong learning.
Growth mindset.
But practically, though, on-ground reality shows that sometimes, as much as the employee recognizes that they need to adapt and upskill to keep up with this, because the job that they used to have is going to evolve in the face of new technology and trends, right? But the challenge for some employees is that their employers have not yet integrated, have not done what the government calls workforce transformation yet. But yet they need to learn. And if they're not in a place or a culture whereby the employer has really enforced it, hence they get that practice and exposure and is able to learn on the job, it gets hard for them to carve time out separately to go and pick up those things, especially if they have other commitments, like if they're a caregiver at home, etc. So what would be your best take? Because even if we look at the solutions that the government have crafted up recently, right? I think it's great because they've actually enhanced a lot of the skills futures credits and the skills futures credits and accessibility to help make this more relevant for the everyday worker. But it can be hard for the individual to actually go and do this. So in the face of those challenges, what would you guys give as advice for them to make that journey and transition of upskilling a little easier and manageable?
Maybe I can go first. The support of the employer is super important. That's the reality, right?
Mm.
If your employer doesn't recognize and support your endeavors to scale up, right, it's going to be really difficult because what's the statistic about how much time you spend at work, right? It's basically it's 5 hours, 7 days, and then out of that, there's like 80% of your time is basically at the workplace or at work in some form. So I think it comes back to the earlier point I was making around, you do need to have a bit of a business sense, right? Because ultimately it's a business case, right? So whether you're speaking to a reporting manager or line manager in a larger corporate, or you're speaking to a business owner or the tauke, the SMB who is your boss or whatever, right? The reality is everyone is thinking about it in dollars and cents. It's a business case, right? So you can't be like, hey, I want to go SkillsFuture to learn baking. It's like, hey, what's the relevance to my business, right? But if you explain, I mean, some of the use cases that Ken's already mentioned earlier, right? Because this is actually is covering so many different aspects of how we work today, right? Hey, I think our business would really benefit from some better tooling with Tableau, right? Because now our dashboarding or reporting will be such that we can now have weekly reports and look at the sales performance a lot more closely and then build performance improvement based on that, right? And for that, right, I think that there's this cost, there's this skill. If I do this and invest the time into it and you give me the permission and the space to do that, right, I'll come back and I'll be able to work on a project for you where I put this into place into our BAU. You're selling internally, it's a pitch, it's a case you're building. It has to have value.
Hey Coconuts, I'm very excited to introduce you to the latest offerings from World First. World First is an all-in-one business account that fuels your business worldwide. Their latest product, the World Card, is a multi-currency business card that allows you to get unlimited 1.2% cashback on all your business spend. If you use it on Meta Ads, Google Ads, ChatGPT, Salesforce, and more, you get additional benefits, of course subjected to change, terms and conditions apply. But more importantly, if today you are looking to start your business, whether it's in retail, e-commerce, or B2C, World First is your partner. Check them out, link in the description below, and back to the show.
But what if the employer can't afford to give that time? So Ken, earlier on, as you mentioned, it's now a situation of sometimes it's 2 people doing 3 people jobs. The employer will probably be like, we're all stretched thin already. There's no time and space for you right now to go and take like say 2 hours off work every day to go and learn your WSQ or SQL or W course. Then how can they still realistically fit it in so that they are upgrading themselves even though their employer is not really blessing them or cannot afford to bless them with this space, time, and resources?
I think let's start by looking at the nature of the employment climate right now. And a lot of organizations, they're really trying to move away from a very time-oriented workforce to a task-oriented one. So the differentiation is time is obviously is you clock in, clock out, and that's it. Task is really about building accountability and responsibility on things that are measurable, like what you want to achieve. And it's not a day-to-day basis, it's not micromanagement. It's really trying to look at it from a weekly context or even a monthly context, depending on your role itself. So if you look at it from a task-oriented basis, I still strongly believe, and I would really urge employers out there to relook at, what they are driving. Because ultimately, doing more with less doesn't mean that means that more time need to be put in. It's really about the outcomes and defining those milestones, right? If you want an outcome of a sales that goes up on a year-on-year 100%, what does it mean for someone? How can you build that to an individual's career in terms of looking at them from a 3-month milestone, a 6-month milestone, to make sure they are gradually getting there? And upon defining the milestones, and if let's say they are able to achieve that, that gives them every opportunity to do something more than what they are currently doing, to learn more than that. So I really back Puay Lim there. Puay Lim. Because I think it's a really important one for us to look at, where that continuous learning needs to get the support from the company itself.
With the upskilling that they get, right? What about certain other non-financial benefits that an employee should potentially be looking for? Because earlier with that 70,000 mean salary for the year, 5,008 per month, it doesn't include all those whatever sorts of benefits, right?
Correct.
So what sort of benefits which are non-financially driven should employees be looking out for?
Or can they negotiate for? So let's say if the employer says, I get that you want a salary increase, but we're really on a cost-cutting measure right now and I can't give it to you, then how can the employee take back control of that conversation and say, okay, but can you give me this then.
So basically, you're asking if you cannot get more money, what can you get?
Yes, correct. Which is very important as well, right?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That one is very important. It is lah. It is. I think we talk about training. Training is really very important. In terms of non financial benefits, number one, I think that in the local context, and just to give a bit of scenario on the backscene of that, we have seen a lot more roles flow into Singapore that are regional based. So for example, right, I'm very quickly on it. In the likes of governance, compliance, risk, maybe 6 years back, you will at most get a head of compliance in Singapore. And then it got elevated to head of compliance for Southeast Asia. And now in today's context, you can find a head of compliance for APAC in Singapore. So what I'm trying to suggest is there's a lot more regional roles that's being flown into Singapore. And with that context of it, I think it is very important to have regional visibility. So what I meant by a non-financial benefit, which I think is important, is perhaps ask the employer, like what sort of social engagement do I get with my regional counterparts, my regional stakeholders? Can I, there are same companies that do a lunch and learn or, overseas sort of mentoring sessions. These are all very, very important in today's context as we are seeing, especially in Singapore, where it's likely we are seeing a lot more roles coming in from Hong Kong into Singapore. And if you look at, like what's happening in the US and Europe, right? The thing is, when people take out money, they don't just not do anything. They will reinvest the money somewhere. And if you look at Asia itself, if you look at Sing dollars, it's a very safe haven that people like and people feel a comfort in. So in fact, there could be opportunities in Singapore. And I think that this non-financial benefits is really important. That's probably what I would advocate aside training.
I'll say, similar points, but some slightly different framing. So I think if you look at what employees today care about, right? And there are a billion surveys to this effect, right? Talentkraft is guilty of some of these surveys, and my previous employers were also guilty of some of these surveys. But what you definitely do see is generational shifts in what employees prioritize and value, right? And comp and band is always there, right? That's always important. But as you said, non-money, right? What else is important? Career health today is moving, is often up there in the top 3, top 5. So what is career health? One element of it is the training and the L&D, right? Those opportunities. But the other is, also touching on what Ken just mentioned, right? It's really about having some visibility and understanding about where is my career actually going to go? Where's my career advancement? So is it going to go regional, like what Ken is implying? Or am I going to become a specialist in my field, a subject matter expert? And oftentimes it's not so much about the employer saying, I promise or guarantee you this and that. It's more about whether the conversation is even happening.
And something that you can work towards together on.
Yeah, agree, right? Agree on a plan, right? Like, hey, what do you hope to achieve in these next 2 years, right? You tell me what your goal is, and let's agree that maybe I can help you get there. And then I'll check in along the way to see whether that's happening or not. And you can hold me accountable, I can hold you accountable, so on and so forth. So career health is actually very, very important these days, right? Another one, which I guess was a fairly hot topic, I guess maybe in some circles still is, flexible work arrangements. So demographically, people always say, that's all the Gen Z types one, right? But it's actually not just the Gen Z, right? It's also the older demographics, right? People who are entering, the mid 40s or 50s. You start to have other things to juggle: aging parents, kids, other priorities in life. So you look for other things like, hey, can the employer accommodate this flexibility, right? And what is the cost of that? And what's the business case of that? How can we make this happen together? But the willingness to even have that conversation, I think that can be quite a draw, and that can be quite important.
Which brings me to the next question, because I speak for myself, but the number one thing that I prioritize these days is actually flexible work arrangement. Ideally, work from home, remote. Don't keep calling me back to the office.
You're the young type one, right? You're the young type one.
No, I'm millennial.
She is young, man.
No, but because I have kids, right? So being able to pick them up, be there for them matters a lot to me. But this also conflicts with some employers, whereby not mine, but some employers who are trying to call these employees always back, right? And I have friends who are like complaining and asking me, hey Dawn, should I quit my job because, I got used to work from home, but now they're calling me back to office and they're going to 4 or 5 days, but I want like 1 day or 2 days. And there's that because of this conflict, how should the employee navigate that conversation without potentially having to give up? Because it could go both ways, right? The employer could say, no, this is our new mandate, right? Everyone come back or your job's gone. But yeah, the employee like, but I need this flexibility. What would you guys say the employee should do to navigate and prepare for that conversation?
Now that's a very important and relevant question. I think it is number one is we got to understand why are you being called back. I think that's the thing that a lot of people come back, right? But because of
FaceTime
but they don't really, yes, FaceTime is important, but what about FaceTime? I think is very important because every company call back their employees for different reasons, different priorities as well. I think number one is important to get that. I've heard companies that say, oh, because we want to have the cultural essence still, we don't lose ground on that. Then if I want my flexibility, then probably I will be a culture ambassador for the firm as well. I'll look at culture from a different context of that. Culture doesn't mean you have to be back 5 days a week or 4 days a week, but we need to first understand why is the reason. If it's more in terms of getting a certain outcome that is very relevant, right? Like what Puay Lim mentioned, is all about P&L to a large context. Then I think it's very important to drive their accountability, right? I think employers sometimes fear work from home is because people sometimes tend to go missing as well, right? Right? Like so I think if you want work from home and you let the employer know these are my accountabilities, this is what I want to achieve, and before your boss can reach out to you, you constantly update your boss in terms of where you are and all. I think that gives your employer a vote of confidence for you to work. In fact, when you are just comparing this work from home notion, I've seen companies that actually advocate work from anywhere. Means that, let's say if I want to go Bali for 1 week of holiday, I can actually work 3 days and only take 2 days of leave. I know there are companies that actually cultivate that. On the other hand, there are companies that really want people to come back and they make, it's quite interesting, right? The incentive they get people to come back was actually, this is my lunch menu for this week. You can indent all the lunches that you want for the week itself. Proper restaurants, I mean, probably like $15, $20 per meal sort of food. The only requirement I have is for y'all to sit down together and eat during lunch hours. So what that company then, I would presume, is they're trying to drive some cultural essence of that. But that could be done in different ways, right? It doesn't have to be 5 days a week. It can be 2 days a week. But what does that mean for that? I think that's very important. So back to the context of the employee, I think it's very important also. I feel it's not just about the company, right? Like you also need to be able to articulate why do you need that flexibility for.
Right.
I think sometimes people lose that. And in fact, it's an interesting topic because like people don't see it from the other's perspective as well. So a fresh graduate coming in wanting 4 days flexibility will feel like, well, how come this person has 4 days, I don't have it? But because this person could be a mother of 4. So I think it's also on companies' responsibility to over communicate such things.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of companies are very good at doing that.
Yeah, actually that's a great point because I think part of the reason why employees are pushing back, because at least among my friends that I speak to, they don't get that communication from the bosses. It's just slapped down like a rule, right? And you can't fight against that rule. So there's this bitterness. But like you said, if both parties can come to a mutual common ground and understanding of each other's role and reasons for wanting to do that, I believe something could be done.
Yep. And one last point to note also, flexibility doesn't mean work from home. You think about it again. If you define flexibility, it's not quite flexibility anymore, right? So I think it's important to understand at what life stage and what sort of flexibility you need and come up with a plan. How do we integrate work into life? That's where it comes a work-life balance, right? And I think that takes two parties to communicate. So when an employer doesn't say as much, doesn't mean that you can't ask for it. It's not the what, but the how.
So it's the outcome must be clearly communicated, but that process to get to the outcome, that needs to be, it could be an open, kind of a discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, but of course, recognizing that it's not always easy. Not all employers are open to having that conversation on those terms. So it does take a little bit of getting to it. But it's exactly what. It's outcome driven. It's you look at both sides.
Okay.
But that's a great reminder. So if you're an employer and you're struggling to get your workers back to the office, take what they said and over communicate so that your employees start to understand why you're calling them back, and then the conversation can continue from there.
And as with all or most conversations that we have or we are having, AI, like what Puay Lim mentioned earlier, is that's the next topic that we would like to discuss, right? So AI is becoming crucial in identifying talent, right? So how can candidates utilize AI to be more marketable, to be, I wouldn't say beating the system, but to optimize lah, to ensure that their resumes and whatever that their CVs would be more noticeable, and also how do you have any tips on that?
I'll go for a quick one.
Yeah,
Then you
go,
can
go,
you
go.
can. I think because I'm in the line, so
Of course.
also use it. Right?
Yeah. What stands out to you?
So to me is I think okay, let's look at the okay. So I truly believe AI is an enabler, right? It's not here to replace what we do, right? So the mindset needs to be right in the first place, because when you see the light in it, you will want to use it. You don't fear it, and I feel that there are some people that really fear it at this point in time. So in my line of business, a lot of companies, when they use AI recruitment tools, right, is to really filter out the very initial application stages. So it's not even during the interview, it's probably before the interview. So if you look at that, right, if you know that the AI tool is actually used to filter out things, then I think it's very, you gotta be street smart, right? You gotta understand number one, okay, if I'm the candidate, right, I will understand what is the job description, right? I will try to link keywords of the job description to my resume as well. And one thing to point out is, there is, in today's landscape, there's no one CV that fit all job. Every CV needs to be tailor-made for the role that you're applying for. And I feel that every CV needs to have an overview of what you have accomplished, why you're applying for this role, and how you're going to value add into this role within that 3-4 sentences. And if you can use that at the start and capture some of the keywords that the job description mentioned from maybe scope or responsibilities, right, then you will pass the AI round lah. You know, in that sense, I would say maybe this is a tip for someone out there. I think it's important
It's
to
a
have
good
that.
one though, because I'm hearing from my friends who are trying to find jobs now, right? What they do is they say like, I'm applying like 200, sending out 200 and no one calls me back. But in my mind, I'm like, 200? That's a lot. That means it's the same thing sent 200 times lah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Because
Are you
I've seen
sure you're
people,
getting the JD
I've
right?
seen,
Yeah.
I've seen people that
And that's where
apply.
they get filtered out, right? Because the same thing sent 200 times is not just JD.
So that is very important. And sometimes AI tool is also, and the last part of it, also look at LinkedIn, right? I mean, LinkedIn is a evergreen sort of a way of communicating your experiences now, like what you're good for in a corporate setting. So I think, make sure, number one, it's a very 101, but make sure you have a complete LinkedIn profile, a proper one, right? Talk about your title, your headline, your skills, because these are little things that AI can filter out easily. You just make sure that those are, and if you have any experiences, let's say even like for both of us to be doing such a podcast, we need to showcase our work within LinkedIn itself. I think it's very important. And the last thing I'll suggest, and this is not so much on AI, but quickly on LinkedIn, because a lot of people have been asking how to best utilize LinkedIn, right? It's not just to look at your current connection. If you look at your connection, right, I think we talk about organic business development, organic networking. How do you build network and out of your current network? And that one is very important. And LinkedIn enables you to do that, because ultimately, if you go to your, the icon of the connection, and then you go and press filter, you can actually see first level network connection, second level, third level. A lot of time the second levels are not connected yet. That means that you all have mutual friends or mutual people that know each other. Endorse those. Get these people to help you to recommend to the right people that you want to connect. It goes a long way. But it takes an effort. Yeah.
So it's more long-term game.
Yeah, last part I sway off AI a bit into LinkedIn, but I thought that is something that is very, very crucial into
But
this
I mean,
market.
LinkedIn uses AI algorithms anyway.
They do.
No, but that's actually, I want to pick up on that, right? Because for me, my answer is a bit different, right? Because there's a joke, right? I don't know if you've seen this. Is like interview of like Sam Altman, right? OpenAI's CEO, founder. And he said, oh yeah, someone sent me this like email the other day, and they've already like used AI, right, to make they wrote it in bullet points, and they use AI to make it into a full email. And when they send it to me, right, I use AI to re-summarize it into bullet points. So it's like, couldn't you just have sent me the bullet points, right? And then just save us all this nonsense, right? And I think the point here is really trying to get to, which I completely agree, right? It's that actually, it's what Ken started with. AI is an enabler. So what it's actually serving to do is to amplify or magnify the stuff that you actually would have been doing or should have been doing anyways, right? So a lot of the stuff that Ken gave as good advice, right? You rewind the clock 10 years ago, right? That still is good advice, you know? Please don't send the same CV to 200 different jobs and hope that, you get a response. Because back then, the only difference is that the person's, the screening element, right, is not the AI. It was a poor human who was looking at 200 things and saying, this is rubbish, right?
But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Also uses keyword to match.
Exactly. It's the same thing. Right?
Control F.
Yeah, exactly. So all the good advice about like making yourself, customizing, speaking about yourself holistically, making yourself stand out to what the JD speaks to. All of that is, I mean, you should be doing it anyways, right? You should be doing it, right? And in fact, the risk today, right? I think so. I had a chance to give a masterclass. Well, I'm a bit ashamed to call it a masterclass. A masterclass the other day on how to ace your interview at a career fair the other day. And I gave the usual stuff like, hey, come in with a proper LinkedIn profile, do your research, blah, blah, blah. And when the questions come, follow this format. And actually what I realized that the thing that I should have said, which I wish I said and I didn't, was that you actually should be authentic. And the risk today, right, of a lot of people today who AI-fy their CVs or AI-fy their LinkedIn posts and all that, right, is that it loses that authenticity. You sound like every other person on LinkedIn. It's super boring, right? Who are you, right? So if you lose that voice, I think that's a real problem. So I think you do need to remember, like, AI or not, today's world, you need to stand out, right? You need to stand out, and to stand out, you need to find your own voice and do all that. And that's still the right thing to do.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, guys. So you're supposed to use AI to amplify what you should be doing and not AI to cut down and save time. Last time it takes me 200 hours to send out. Now just take like 1 hour, send out all. But it's supposed to be still like, maybe not 200 hours anymore, about 30 hours, making sure it fits. And I think that's a really good reminder because sometimes we get so caught up in new technologies and we're like, oh, it saves us time, and we forget about the real reasons why things matter. The real reasons why employer hire in the first place. Yeah. Alex, what do you think?
No, I think that's wonderful advice, right? And for our listeners or viewers who are a little bit stuck, right, on sending their 200, and I've had friends 300, 400, 500 also they send, right? I think that this is definitely good.
Hey, actually,
tips.
can I add one more point? Because I do remember that. Oh, sorry. I do remember that. I think your audience tends to be this PMAT class of people in their also not maybe fresh out of school, but maybe
30s, 40s,
mid-careers, right? I also want to say that I think the conventional wisdom, and I think please, Ken, you're in the line of business, right? The conventional wisdom for like the mid and the 30s and 40s up, right? You're in the mid-senior category, typically in this stage of your careers. And I think the way you find jobs tend not to be spamming the world with CVs. You're actually out there, and it's either a headhunter is knocking on your door because you've done something of value in your career.
That's right.
Speak to Morgan McKinley, right?
Thank you.
Or it's the network. It's the network that you have built, right? And it's the relationships that you have built that you lean on, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be true, AI or not, right? And it's hopefully your network isn't one where when you reach out to them and they're like, I'm going to AI screen you first. That speaks of a different sort of issue, right? But I think if you're in your 30s and 40s and you're a mid-senior stage PMAT, that's probably more likely your pathways than prepping a CV out to submit.
Yeah. I think that's very true. My just one point to add on that is for every PMAT who's listening out there, right? I think it is very important for you all to not only be relevant, but I always say it's kind of like an organic business development. You are kind of doing sales for yourself. It's important for you to know the right people.
Personal branding,
personal branding is
right?
really very important. And I think, if you are someone that is desirable out there, in fact, I've seen roles that's been created for individuals. It's gone with the times where you're going to see a role that has been, advertised on LinkedIn and then you apply for it. Most of the time right now, if you see a job that's been LinkedIn or advertised, yeah, like which is not good news for us. But yes, I think back to like what I'm trying to advocate for my team as well, right? Everything starts with a candidate, ends with a candidate. If you get a good candidate, it's 50% of the sales done in our line of business. But what do you do with the candidate? I think where can you introduce a candidate to? And sometimes it's not about getting a head count. It's about having the right talent, having the right strategic partner. And it's not about building relationship. It's about how can you value add to the job, to the stakeholder. So if you look at it from the context, right, we shouldn't be fearful of the current climate. We should be using this opportunity to really upskill yourself and be confident and build your network. It's never too late. I'm sure most of the listeners out there should have a LinkedIn. Start by that. Look at that. Start to create network. Start to ask for endorsement and all this. It goes a long way.
I agree. I can attest to that because I'm actually a beneficiary of that trend. My CEO actually created my role for me. Prior to that, it never existed. And then later on, when I wanted to step away and do some stuff while not saying goodbye, another role was created for me in order for everyone to have a win-win situation. And I think sometimes, when we get very caught up in the whole layoffs are happening, recession, cost cutting, but yet I want to increase my salary, people tend to forget that at the end of the day, it's what value that you can bring to the company, how you articulate that value, and then how can you find a win-win that is for both parties rather than just focusing on oneself. And like you said, sometimes people forget to over-communicate. They forget to be authentic. They forget they need to say this to show this perspective instead of just jumping straight to I want this benefit. Yeah, the process of why I want this benefit, I'm asking, let's work towards this outcome to get is forgotten. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
and
you,
if you
thank
guys
you.
would like to check out the salary guide, where can they head to? Ken, could you point them in the right direction?
Yes, just go to Morgan McKinley website. It's definitely right there. And if there's anything, feel free to just send email over to inquire on this. Just have it in soft copy, hard copy, anything you want. Yeah.
Or send LinkedIn message to Ken.
Yes, you might even give me a job. I will create jobs. Yes, but definitely, it's just really good here. Thank you.
Thank you for this episode. So we hope you guys enjoyed listening to this episode of Wise and Shine. And if you'd like to find out more,
Yes, please go to www.thefinancialcoconut.com and leave your email there. We will update you with new episodes that we will be releasing almost on a weekly basis, right? So one more point from me. If you have doubts on your LinkedIn, just drop me a DM and then I'll see how I can help you as well, right? So I've got about 22,000 followers and I'm very active on LinkedIn. Yeah.
That's a
drop us a
flex, man.
comment on this video and you might hear back from us. We'll see you on the next episode of Wise and Shine. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.